Language of murder is what with the stand your ground law certainly going to be discussed. Tracy, you have witnessed how people in many pockets of the country galvanized over this issue about your son's death. I want to play what President Obama had to say after the passing of Trayvon. Take a listen.
My main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
Tracy, for you, what does justice mean? Are you concerned that people have moved on? The attention has died down, so to speak, and moved on to other situations like the Newtown massacre?
Well, as parents of a slain child, we never move on. And we'll do our best to keep it in the media and to keep people's attention on it, because certainly, even though Trayvon's gone, he would definitely not be forgotten. And just to everyday news, different news breaks, and we don't expect Trayvon to be the top story every day in the media, but he's definitely the top story in our life. And we took a vow to make sure that his honor and his legacy won't be tainted by this whole situation.
Again, the trial starts on June the 10th. Mr. Crump, as we look at where the trial stands coming up and how it's all played out in the media so far, I want to get your take on Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Sabrina, we know, has been pushing for the Trayvon Martin amendment that would eliminate protections in cases where the person killed is pursued or followed. But as you know, a Florida task force has reaffirmed the state's Stand Your Ground law last week. So does that signal to you where the Zimmerman defense will go, how it will hold up in court?
Well, you know, the Stand Your Ground law, nobody talked about it this time last year until Trayvon was killed. And we have to really think about how Trayvon has changed the conversation. Everybody in America knows about this controversial law. And now, for the first time in 5 years, there were no new states that enacted Stand Your Ground laws. So we look at that as a plus. If this case does not go to a jury where Tracy and Sabrina can have their right to trial by jury, their day in court, people will be terribly disappointed all across the country, because that's all they want is their day in court. And we believe the evidence, once it's presented to the jury, their killer of their son will be convicted.
As Sabrina had mentioned, that the original motive for a lot of this attention in seeking justice was just to gain an arrest so that more information could be discovered and the case properly vetted. As we go through this, I just want to point out that we should mention George Zimmerman has sued NBC Universal for defamation, and the company strongly denies those allegations. Some would argue that the publicity around this case has hurt both sides. There were negative stories that came out about Trayvon, damaging revelations about George Zimmerman. And Mr. Parks, I want to get your take on the pictures that show George Zimmerman. We showed them earlier in the segment, the bloody head on the night of the shooting, and how they're going to be used in the trial itself. Is this indicative evidence of the fact that Mr. Zimmerman is telling the truth?
Well, I think you have to remember, on this night, Trayvon was unarmed. And that's the part I think that all Americans must always remember. Trayvon was an unarmed teenager. George Zimmerman was a man with a gun. In no situation whatsoever does Trayvon have any obligation. It's very clear here he had the right to fight for his life, and that's important.
When we talk about the prosecution of Florida within your hometown county is going to be exercising the case itself. They're going to be going up against George Zimmerman's defense attorney. And I mentioned, since the death of Trayvon, we've had the Newtown massacre, we've had a lot of other gun violence in the country, but mainly we've been talking a lot about urban violence. And we've had two young girls with bright futures that were recently gunned down in Chicago. We had an article just this week in the Washington Post that talked about how a community in Maryland has been rocked by the deaths of 6 young teens that were killed in separate incidents. Sabrina and Tracy, I want to ask this of you. Do you think that urban gun violence is getting the attention that it needs?
I think it's it's not just urban gun violence. I think it's violence in general, senseless gun violence in general. The Newtown massacre, all the violence that's going on in Chicago, the violence that's just going on across the country is senseless. And lawmakers need to take a real good look at these gun laws and the people that they are giving gun license to and gun permits and letting them go buy weapons. Newtown massacre, case in point. Why would you need a semi-automatic weapon to be hunting? That's senseless.
Sabrina, I want to ask you lastly how your family is holding up, and are you ready for the emotional task of what going to trial June 10th means?
My family is holding up fairly well. We're leaning on each other. We're leaning on the rest of the family and also friends. I don't know if we're ready emotionally. I think we're just going to take one day at a time and just, thank God for each day.
I want to thank all of you for being here. Sabrina Fulton, Tracy Martin, we've got Benjamin Crump and Daryl Parks. My thanks to all four of you. I do appreciate it. We're back with much more right after this.